We're gonna go ahead and get started here today. Welcome back from spring break. I did post a video on Monday. I was actually expecting to be gone Monday and Wednesday this week, traveling out to Baltimore for government stuff, but that didn't end up happening. So here I am. Doesn't really matter if you're watching this video after class. You know, usually I record my videos anyway. So we're just going to go over this content that we have here. We're going to talk about cron. We're going to talk about backups today. So cron is a way that we can run commands regularly at a specified interval. And then we're going to talk about backups because servers crash, bad things happen, and you probably want to keep your data safe and do things like that. But before we do any of that stuff, any questions about the WordPress load balancing labs? If you have anything specific, we can talk about it later. But if there's anything that you want me to cover, again, or in more detail, just let me know and we can certainly do that. Alright. So again, cron is this way that we can run commands repetitively at regularly scheduled intervals. Basically, there's this format of doing cron. So we specify a couple different numbers here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different positions here. So the first position specifies the month that we and our command to be, or the minute, sorry. The minute that we want our command to be run in, the hour that we want our command to be run in, the day of the month, and then there's this day of week, I think, day of week. And we can specify with each of these numbers when we want our command to actually be run. So I believe the smallest increment that we can run a command with cron is every minute. There's a few ways you can work around that, but for the most part, that's the case. So one of the main reasons we're talking about cron right now is for doing backups. So you can see right here in their examples, for example, you can run a full backup of all your user accounts at 5 a.m. every week with this command. So that would be the first day of the week at hour 5, minute 0. So 5 a.m. First day of every week. So that's pretty straightforward, I think. So there's actually a couple of other aliases for cron that I usually would use instead of actually saying these numbers or whatever. So there's at reboot, at yearly, at weekly, at daily. And the reason I would go about doing it that way is because sometimes you'd fat finger something and you wouldn't actually get this right. You might accidentally type something wrong. So instead of saying, let's say you have this, and we're typing in our cron tab here, I'm going to change over to root here really quick. Instead of saying this and saying like echo hello or something like that, where you might mess up one of these numbers or positions there, you could just say, what was that one? That one was daily. So I could just say at daily. And that's just an easy way to remember it. And the other thing that allows you to do is you don't have to remember which positions of the command that actually is in. So that's a useful one. So, and actually, let's go back and do this really quick here. So in order to get to our cron tab, we would say cron tab E, and that would automatically generate a new cron tab file for us. If we had an existing cron tab for our user, it would allow us to edit that cron tab. So before we do anything, though, we need to make sure that cron is actually running. So on a lot of distributions, more lightweight distributions, I think Ubuntu enables cron by default. We actually want to make sure that cron is running before we do anything else. Systemctl status cron. We can see it says active running. Looks like it's pretty good, and we can see some output here. So it's pretty, I think, apparent that cron is actually running. If it wasn't running, remember we would just do a systemctl enable and then start cron, and then it would be running. It would do those directives that we give it to do. So you can actually do multiple directives. So you have to specify this time component for every single directive. So I could say at daily echo hello, and that echo wouldn't go anywhere because there's no terminal attached to it, but it's just kind of an example. And I could say at weekly echo no. Then I could say 0 0 0 0 star 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 echo yes. So one of the things I haven't talked about yet is what the star actually means. So when there's a star in one of these positions, it means run this command in every single possible increment. So let's say I have a star in the day of month position. That means it will run every single day of the month. Say I have a star in the month position, it will run every single month. And same with day of week. And we can actually control this a little bit more. We can actually say a specific range of days or months or days of week that we want our command to actually run. So let's say we're going to keep those as every day. But let's say we want to run, I don't know what the start of the week is. I think it's, I don't really know. It doesn't really matter. But let's say the first day of the week through the third day of the week. And that would run on the first 3 days of the week. And we could actually control that very specifically. Well, basically, again, when you have a star, that's just a shorthand for saying the first through the 7th day of the week. It might be 0 indexed too. I don't exactly recall offhand. I think it is probably 0 indexed, so it's probably 0 through 6 instead of 0 through 7. But it's kind of minor details. I think if we go over, it's probably a good exercise to look at here. If you go man cron tab, or let's say man cron. So it doesn't really give us very much information about what's actually happening. I forget, I pulled this list from one of the man pages. There we go. So it's man 5, different section, file formats manual for cron tab. Alright. Yeah, so even the man page doesn't exactly know what is Sunday is. So Sunday could be either 0 or 7 depending on the configuration. So we really don't actually know. If it matters, you probably want to look up for exactly which distribution you're using, what the actual beginning of the week is. Alright. Okay, so we have cron started running. It's we know how we can edit the actual cron tab, but the other thing we need to look at is who's actually allowed to create a cron tab and run cron commands. So if we go back to this file, there's something interesting in here, I think. Is in this one. Alright, so there's a couple other files that are used to configure cron. There's this scron.allow and there's scron.deny. So at least by default on Ubuntu, neither of these files exist, but if they do, the users that are specified in cron.allow will be the only ones allowed to create cron tabs. If you specify users in cron.deny, those users will specifically be disallowed from creating a cron tab. So both of the files can exist, I think, but cron.allow will always take precedence over cron.deny. So it's basically cron.allow is a whitelist, and if that file exists, you're in a whitelist configuration, and if it's cron.deny, then you're in a blacklist configuration where only the users not specified in the file will be allowed to execute cron tab or actually have cron configuration, I guess. And then, yeah. So, going into this a little bit more, if there isn't a user configured, or sorry, if the problem is this, when reading through this, like it's very odd how it says things. So let me just read this to you. If neither of these files exist, then depending on site-dependent configuration parameters, only the super user will be allowed to use this command, or all users will be allowed to use this command. So basically not really saying anything. And figuring out what site-dependent configuration parameters actually mean is a little bit challenging, and I dug into it a bit, but I didn't really find anything. So I'd say, generally speaking, what you should go on is only the super user will be allowed to use this command. So by default, I'd say a safe assumption would be only the super user will be allowed to use this command. So that's root, if we're unsure about that. But let's just be 100% sure, and let's actually make this cron.allow. And then we'll just say root, and then we'll just go ahead and restart cron. And we'll status it really quick to make sure it actually works. And I think everything's working there. So it's probably something that you want to configure. If, let's say, if you have standard users on the system, you don't necessarily want them executing commands over and over and over again on a repeat basis. Let's say you have a shared environment like something like the cs.dscenix box where people can log in and do things. Again, you don't necessarily want them running things repetitively over and over again. So this might be something that you want to do. You might want to restrict your cron access a little bit. Another thing that we might want to do, and a lot of web applications require this, is allowing data. So if you're running an application that needs to process data in the background, a lot of the often it will involve adding a cron job actually. So you'd have to allow data to run those cron jobs. And you could theoretically run them as root, but we want to keep privileges as low as possible. And if the application is already running as data, then odds are it doesn't really need to be run as root in the first place. So I think that's a pretty safe configuration for right now. So that's pretty much cron for you. And we're going to come back to cron after we've talked a little bit about backups. And we're going to actually use cron, hopefully, to show a demonstration config of how you could automatically take a backup every day or something like that. So with that, we're going to go on to backups. So again, the reason we want to do backups is things crash, servers get hacked, disks fail, and you definitely want to keep important information safe. You want to be able to be the guy who, after the server farm burns down, can just magically make all of the data come back. So with that, we have a couple different tiers of backups. We have to think about offsite versus offline versus online, and then we also have to think about full versus incremental. So one of the core principles that you want to think about is offsite backups. So a lot of organizations, when CryptoLocker hit and things like that, they had completely on-site backups, completely online backups. And in cases like that, where CryptoLocker kind of just spreads throughout your network, if, let's say, you have one host that has all your backups and it gets CryptoLockered, then that means that you can't restore anything. So we really have to think about that when we're doing backups. Now, depending on the size of your organization, there's actually a lot of automated kind of pseudo offsite offline backup solutions. There's kind of appliances that exist on your network that would just kind of receive backups and manage all of that. And those are sort of all right. But again, if your server farm burns down or something crazy like that, or some tornado strikes, you still definitely want an offsite backup. And a lot of the organizations that I've been in typically do something like a daily on-site backup, and then perhaps a weekly. We're going to literally download all of our backups to a hard drive, and we're going to take it to a bank vault and store it there. So depending on the sensitivity of the information, depending on how serious the organization takes kind of maintaining backups integrity of data, you might take different steps. For this, all we're going to do is kind of online backups. So we're going to have one host that is going to back stuff up, and we're going to have one host that kind of receives those backups. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about was full versus incremental backups. So a smart, well, relatively speaking, we'll talk about this. So a smart backup solution might only backup files that have changed, that have been modified, new files that have been created. A full backup solution, more of a dumb backup solution, will just back up everything regardless of whether it's changed or anything like that. So usually when you're using a partial backup solution, kind of an incremental backup solution, that will sort of rely on a third-party tools and things like that. I know of a couple ways to do it, but they're really, really convoluted, so we're just not really going to do that right now. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to take a full backup of our system. And there's a couple of different meanings of full, and we'll get into that. And then we're going to export that to the other system. So again, looking at full. When I say full backup of a system, usually what I would mean is backup of all of the things that you've changed on that base system. So given a base Ubuntu VM, what information do I need to actually restore that VM to its original configuration? So let's say in the context of a WordPress site, the things that are really important to us are our etc directory, for our database configuration, for our Apache configuration, PHP configuration, and our var www directory that it contains all of our application logic, contains all of our actual content, our uploads and things like that. And then finally our actual SQL data in our SQL database. And the one challenge, so that's the one other thing that I want to talk about, is SQL backups. So actually backing up the binary SQL data on the disk is a little bit challenging. So with optimizations and everything, MySQL doesn't necessarily write out data to the disk right away. So we're actually going to do one other thing specific to MySQL called MySQL dump, which will dump our actual MySQL to the disk and make sure that we get everything when we're doing the backup. So that'll add a little bit of a challenge to it, but not too worried about it, I don't think. So the other things that we're going to do, we're going to use SCP to actually copy our backup file to our backup host, completely fake backup host. So one of the things we'll need to have done previous to this is use SSH, or we've needed to generate SSH keys and deploy them. So that's something we've done before, and my VMs are currently set up to do that. But to automatically copy files between two hosts, again, you're going to need SSH keys. And we're going to actually name our file, our backup file, based on a custom date command. And we're going to talk about how you can actually formulate different dates for your backup and how you could generate different things like that. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go through and do this whole thing manually the first time, I think, and then we're going to come back around and we're going to write a script that will just automatically do it, and then we'll have one line in our cron tab which will actually run that script every single time. And hopefully everything will work as per usual. So let's go through the different steps that we want to run here. I'm on this 54 box right now. I'm going to copy my data over to 55, so I'm just going to make sure that I can SSH to 55 really quick. Alright, I'm going to change to root, and I'm going to make sure SSH keys are also enabled for root. So SSH DSU. I don't think SSH keys are enabled. So generate keys as root. Remember, the SSH keys that you generate are only valid for the user you generate them as. I could theoretically copy my keys from DSU, the DSU user, up to the root user, but whatever, doesn't matter. And now if I SSH again, you can see completely automated and everything like that. Again, the same keys that work for SSH apply to SCP, so the files will automatically be copied if we were to do an SCP. But let's actually go and do this. So we're going to run everything as root for right now. We could work around that a little bit, but I'm going to try and generally, we're just going to run it as root and call it good. The only thing that root's actually really required for in this case is the home directory backup. Since each home directory would be owned by a different user, we need root permissions to actually copy all of them. And for Etsy and for var, we could actually copy it with a low privileged user and do all of that, but we'll just leave that off for now. So we're just going to use tar, we're going to use cf, so that will create an archive. We could also use z, which would gzip compress it. So if we're worried about our backups taking up too much size, we could compress it. I'll go ahead and compress it for right now, so cfz. And then we say our backup name, so I'll just say backup.tar.gz, and then we say all of the folders that we want to actually back up. So I'm going to say I'm going to back up home, I'm going to back up Etsy, I'm going to back up var dub. And let's see exactly what happens there. Alright, so that finished up, so we can actually use tar tf backup.tar.gz, and that will show us all of the contents of our tar file. We can see we have all of our WordPress files under var dub there. We have all of our Etsy, so even the files that we didn't ever change or anything, just might as well back it all up. It's only a few kilobytes. And then if we go all the way up, keep going, we also have all of our home directory for a couple different users there. So let's do this. You can see this whole backup was 17 megabytes, so we have plenty of storage nowadays if you're working on something simple that doesn't really have much requirements like WordPress, and you don't have very much content or anything. There's really no reason not to back up everything. So the other thing that we said we were going to do is we were going to use the mysql dump command to dump the actual mysql statements. So I could say mysql dump, and I need to do a couple different things. I need to specify exactly which database to dump, or I could say all databases. Since we only have one database on this host, our WordPress database, I'll just say WordPress. So I'll say mysql dump WordPress. And the other thing we need to do, since we've configured password authentication for root or for WordPress, it's probably best to provide the WordPress username and password, but I don't recall it offhand. Or yeah, I probably do. So I'd say, here's the never-ending struggle. Do I say lowercase u or do I say uppercase u? We're going to try lowercase. Press, and then password, 1 exclamation point. Oh my, okay. Got it on the first try there. That's pretty exciting. And then what I would do is I would redirect. So this is printing it just a standard out right now. That's what it does. Is I'd redirect the output of this command into just, let's say, wordpress.sql. And that's all you would do. So this actually has all of the SQL statements that are required to recreate your database. So this is really nice because it doesn't depend on any versions of MySQL really. If I was to back up the actual data from MySQL, and that's probably in like var lib MySQL, there's a bunch of different files that describe everything. Again, platform dependent, might be different on different distributions. But again, our challenges for doing that is if something isn't written out to the database on disk yet, it'll break things. If there's things that are sort of locked, that are kind of working, it'll break things. But this allows us to just do everything nicely. So right now, let's look at where this is. So this is at root wordpress.sql. Got to be a little bit concerned where we're putting this. Normally, of course, you would be required to authenticate to the database to get this information. If I just leave it around laying in temp or something like that, it will still be there. I might just go ahead and delete it later. So yeah, I think I'll do that. I'll run this again, and I'll drop it in temp. All right, and then what I'll do is I'll add that one single file to R backup. Just let that run again really quick. tar tf backup. And we can see we have this wordpress.sql command, or this wordpress.sql file right there. So coming from, let's say our box gets deleted and everything, all we would really have to do is, and this is a little bit iffy, we probably want to selectively take files from the etc directory. If things are changing as we're updating, if we're moving to a new server, certainly we want to take things kind of optionally. But we could really just go into root, we could cd into root, and we could tar xf, so extract our root backup, and that would extract it to the current directory, and it would just overwrite everything. If I'm doing this correctly, it would just overwrite everything in our current directory there, and it would drop everything in var www.wordpress, and it would create all the directories as needed and just drop it all in there. And generally speaking, I think if you're going from an Ubuntu box to a blank Ubuntu box, that would just allow you to magically do everything. The only thing that is a little bit iffy is some of the etc files are a little bit specific to being time kept and everything. So you might only want to restore the Apache configuration files. In order to do that, you could extract, you could go into, let's do this. If I made a directory backup, and maybe I just wanted to look at the backup and see what existed at that point. So I could tar xf backup tar gz, and that would extract everything to the current directory. And then I could go into these files or whatever, and I could look at them. I could selectively restore them. Let's say I wanted to go into var. I could just cp r for recursive again, www var, and then it would just copy just www over to var if I was just trying to selectively restore something. So that's kind of how we would do that. So let's see what we have left here. So we did the MySQL, we did creating our backup. We need to still look at SCP and date. So let's do date first. So normally when we run date, we get this big long string, has spaces in it. Spaces and file names work on Linux, but they're not ideal. You generally want to have underscores or dashes or something like that in your file names. But we can actually formulate date to print date with a specific format. So if we go man date, we can go down and look at this format section. So it says format controls the output, interpreted sequences are this. So let's say I wanted the day of the month. I could just say %d, and there's a bunch of other formats here. The ones that I'm specifically looking at are % lowercase m, so this is case sensitive, % lowercase d, and % lowercase y. So that will be that would be the month, that will be the day of the month, and that will be the year. So in this example, we're just going to take a backup every single day. So this will be sufficient to differentiate between different backups. So in order to do this, let's finish off with this example quick. So again, date gives us that default output. If we say date plus, and then we say any format specifiers after that, you can see we just got 03 for March right there. We got it any number of times. We can build any sort of string that we want to. Again, what we're going to say is %m, %d, %year, %y. So 03, 15, 2017. And that's that. So let's integrate that into our actual tar command. So I'm just going to copy this right here. And what our strategy is going to be is to capture the output of this command and put it into our other command. So let's just do this real quick example here. We'll say echo. So remember, we can use a $sign and a parenthesis, and that will capture the output, and it will basically replace the output from that command right into our actual command. And this should work, I think. Alright, perfect. That's exactly what we expected. So we're going to actually take this component right here, and this is the output that's going to be generated. So again, we're going to capture the output from this command. It will replace this entire thing, and it will be whatever is the output from that, .tar.gz. And that will be the naming convention of our backups. So again, month, day, year. So we're just going to take that, and then we're going to tar, or let's just go back through our history, tar cf. Instead of saying backup.tar.gz, we're going to drop this in there. And there we go. We got a backup that had a dynamic name that was based on today's date. So moving forward from there, all we have to do is say scp, and then we'll say dsu at 192.168.253.55, and we'll drop it in their home directory for right now. And there we go. We got our backup transferred over to our other box. If I go over to Ubuntu 2 right here, we can see we got that backup right there. So what you might want to do is if you have this sort of backup host that has all of these backups that are automatically going to it, you might want to just say, you might want to have a directory for each backup. So I'll just make a directory backups, and then move, so find, we have a host name under backups there. So I could scp this, that's annoying, backups Ubuntu, and then it will be specifically in that directory. So let's go ahead and put all of this together into an automatable script. So let's just make a backup script, backup.sh. Let's make it something that's actually a little bit extensible. So we are going to capture a couple different things. Let's just capture our file name and just store it in a variable right now. So we'll say date. Let me see if I have it. I might have it on the clipboard here. Yep, sure do. So we'll say file name. We'll say host name. We'll just capture this. We could rerun it again later. So we're going to use host name to figure out which directory we're actually going to put our backups into. And then let's go ahead and do this. I'm just going to go through my history, find, we need to do the MySQL backup thing. That's the first thing we need to do. Take that command. Run that. Then we'll say tar cfz file name, and then we'll say home etc home var www temp wordpress.sql. And that will create our file there. And then I think the final thing we'll have to do is scp our file name, whatever it was generated, to dsu at 192.168.253.55, and then we'll say backups, and then host name. Yeah, that looks like it should be pretty good. I'm just going to go over here and delete the backup that we already copied, just so we can see if the script's actually working. make it executable. That looks good, I think. Let's also go, we don't want that MySQL file just floating around. So after we've made our backup archive, let's just go ahead and delete that. And then after we'll just move all of our cleanup kind of to the end. We'll delete the WordPress, and then we'll also delete our backup file locally. Alright, so it looks pretty good, I think. So now the next thing that we would do is we'd go inside of our cron tab and actually specify that we want this backup to be run every single day. So we'd say cron tab E to edit. I'm going to export cron tab E, and then I'll just use the alias again. So I'll say daily, and then I want to run root backup.sh. And that should be good. The final thing that's worth noting is hopefully you recall the path variable, path. So when we have this path variable declared, this is where our bash, our shell, will look through to find where the commands that it's trying to execute are. So if, let's say, we run tar, it will look in this directory for a tar command, then this directory, and so on and so forth all the way down the list. So one of the things that's important to note about cron is it doesn't actually set the path necessarily. So that's one thing that's left up to you as the user. It's kind of one of those security things that they don't do, is they don't set the path. So just to be safe, one of the things you'll usually want to do is inside of whatever script you're running is actually set the path explicitly. So I'm just going to take the path that we have right now, minus a few things at the end there that don't matter, and actually set that explicitly. Export path equal to this. And there we go. I think that's all we have to do. So cron is running. We confirmed it's running. We have it given the path and everything like that. It's set to run daily. And I think we should be pretty good to go with that. So what we'll do is we'll just, I could go into it a little bit more. We could set it to run like every single minute or something like that to actually demonstrate that it's working. But I think what we'll do is just let it be. We'll come back to it on Friday at the beginning of class, and we'll see if it actually worked right. If it didn't, we'll debug it, and we'll try and figure out what went wrong. So that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions about any of the labs, anything that's going on in class, definitely feel free to stick around. Otherwise, I will see you all on Friday.